The blood-stained glove sat in my locker like a death sentence. I knew that glove. Hell, I'd worn it to win the heavyweight championship 3 years ago. My signature red leather Everlast, custom-made with my initials stitched in gold thread. But I hadn't seen it in months. Now here it was, soaked in someone else's blood. My hands shook as I lifted it out. The metallic smell hit me first. Then I saw the news report playing on the gym's TV behind me. A man beaten to death downtown. The killer caught on security footage wearing red boxing gloves. My gloves. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Someone had called this in. Someone wanted me found here, with the evidence. I had maybe 2 minutes before the cops arrived. 2 minutes to decide if I was going to explain something I couldn't understand, or run like the guilty man everyone was about to think I was. I ran. I made it 6 blocks before I had to stop running. My lungs burned and my legs felt like concrete. 3 years out of the ring will do that to you. 3 years of drowning your sorrows instead of training your body. I ducked into an alley behind a pawn shop and tried to think. The championship belt I'd pawned 2 months ago was probably sitting in that shop's window right now. 20 pounds of gold-plated metal that used to mean everything to me. Now it was just another thing I'd sold to keep the lights on. Believe me, that belt represented more than just a title. It represented the night everything went wrong. I can still see that fight. Madison Square Garden, 20,000 people on their feet. Tommy the Hammer Rodriguez across the ring from me, both of us undefeated. The fight that was supposed to make my career. Instead, it destroyed it. See, here's what the newspapers didn't tell you. The fight was fixed. Not by me. I didn't know until the 3rd round when my corner man whispered the plan in my ear. I was supposed to go down in the 8th. Make it look good, but take the fall. I didn't do it. Call it pride, call it stupidity. I fought to win and I won clean. Knocked Rodriguez out in the 10th round with a right hook that should have made me a legend. But the wrong people lost money that night. A lot of money. The promoter, Marcus the King Costello, he was the one who'd set up the fix. After I won, he made sure I'd never fight again. Suddenly, every commission found violations in my paperwork. Every sanctioning body discovered irregularities in my training camp. Within 6 months, I couldn't get licensed to fight in a church basement. Costello owned half the boxing world, and the half he didn't own owed him favors. He buried me so deep I might as well have stayed down in that 8th round. Now someone had killed him, beat him to death with my gloves. The irony wasn't lost on me. Costello had destroyed my life with paperwork and phone calls. Someone had returned the favor with violence. My phone buzzed. Text message from unknown number. Saw the news? You always said you wanted to kill him. Guess you finally did it. A friend. I stared at that message. No one knew I'd said those words except the people who were there the night Costello ruined me. I'd been drunk, angry, shooting my mouth off in Murphy's bar after another promoter turned me away. Said I wanted to wrap my hands around Costello's neck and squeeze until he stopped breathing. But that was just talk, the kind of bitter rambling you do when your world falls apart and you need someone to blame. Except now Costello was dead, and someone wanted to make sure I took the blame. I thought about my alibi for last night. I'd been home alone, working through a bottle of cheap whiskey and watching old fight footage on YouTube. Nobody to vouch for me, no credit card receipts, no phone calls. Just me and my regrets, perfect setup for a frame job. The sirens were getting closer now, echoing off the alley walls. I needed to move, but where? My apartment would be crawling with cops within the hour. My bank account had maybe $200 in it. No friends left in the business, no family to turn to. I'd burned every bridge when I fell from grace. When you go from headlining, pay-per-view, to begging for sparring work, people stop returning your calls real quick. But someone out there knew I didn't kill Costello. Someone who had access to my gloves. Someone who knew about that night in Murphy's bar. Someone who wanted Costello dead but needed a fall guy to take the heat. The question was whether they planned to let me live long enough to figure out who they were. My phone buzzed again. Different number this time. Check the old gym. Locker 247. Come alone. You've got 12 hours before I disappear forever. Someone who knows the truth. Locker 247. That was 3 lockers down from mine in the basement of Gleason's gym, where I used to train before Costello blacklisted me. The gym that probably had more security cameras than a casino. Going there would be walking into a trap. But staying here wasn't exactly safe either. And if someone really knew the truth about Costello's murder, it might be my only shot at clearing my name. I looked down at my hands. These same hands had won me a championship once. Maybe they could save my life now. The sirens were 2 blocks away and closing fast. Time to find out who wanted Marcus Costello dead badly enough to frame me for it. Getting into Gleason's gym after hours wasn't as hard as it should have been. The same fire exit that fighters used to sneak out during boring undercard fights still had a broken latch. Some things never change. The basement smelled like decades of sweat and leather. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate past the old training equipment, trying not to think about how many dreams had died in this room, including mine. Locker 247 stood open, waiting for me. Inside, I found a manila envelope and a handwritten letter. The paper was expensive, cream-colored stock that felt wrong in this grimy basement. I opened the letter first. "You didn't kill Marcus Costello, but you're going to hang for it unless you listen carefully." My blood went cold. Someone had been watching me, planning this. Costello didn't just ruin careers. He destroyed lives. 3 years ago, a young boxer named Danny Sullivan took a dive in a fight Costello arranged. Danny was supposed to lose in the 6th round, walk away with $50,000, and everyone goes home happy. I remembered Danny Sullivan. Kid from Brooklyn with more heart than skill. Fought way above his weight class because he needed the money. But Danny changed his mind in the ring, started winning. So Costello had his people slip something extra into Danny's water bottle between rounds, made sure the kid went down and stayed down. The letter shook in my hands. Danny Sullivan died in the hospital 2 days later, brain hemorrhage from the beating he took after Costello's little cocktail kicked in. The kid was 19 years old. Jesus, I'd heard about Danny's death, but they said it was just bad luck, a blood clot that could have happened to anyone. Boxing was dangerous. Fighters died sometimes, but this letter was saying Costello had murdered that kid. Danny's trainer knew what happened. Man named Eddie Torino. He tried to go to the police, but Costello owned half the cops in the city. Eddie ended up dead 3 months later. Car accident that wasn't so accidental. Eddie Torino. I knew that name. Old school trainer who'd worked with champions back in the day. His death had made the papers because he'd been working with some up-and-coming prospects. That's 2 people Costello killed to cover up 1 fixed fight. But he made a mistake. Danny's girlfriend saw everything. She was working the concession stand that night, had a clear view of Danny's corner. She saw Costello's man put something in that water bottle. Now here's the thing. I was starting to understand why someone wanted Costello dead, but I still didn't understand why they needed me as the fall guy. The letter answered that question in the next paragraph. The girlfriend's name is Sarah Chen. She's been hiding for 3 years, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to expose what Costello did. But she needed help. Someone with access to Costello's inner circle. Someone with a public reason to want him dead. The pieces were falling into place now, and I didn't like the picture they made. "She stole your gloves from the gym 6 months ago. Been planning this ever since." Sarah didn't just want Costello dead. She wanted him destroyed. Wanted the whole world to know what he'd done to Danny. I opened the manila envelope. Inside were photographs, security footage screenshots showing a young Asian woman in the gym's equipment room, rifling through the fighter storage. Another photo showed her at Costello's building yesterday, wearing a maintenance uniform, but the last photograph made my stomach drop. It showed Sarah Chen meeting with Detective Ray Morrison outside police headquarters. Morrison, who'd been investigating the boxing corruption for years. Morrison, who'd always suspected Costello was dirty but could never prove it. The letter continued. Sarah was supposed to kill Costello and disappear. The gloves would point to you, but there wouldn't be enough evidence to convict. Just enough to ruin what was left of your reputation while she got away clean. But Morrison convinced her to do something different. He wanted Costello alive to testify against his whole network. Sarah was supposed to kidnap Costello, not kill him. This is where it gets bad. Something went wrong. Costello fought back. Sarah panicked and beat him to death with your gloves. Now Morrison's trying to cover up the whole operation, and you're the perfect scapegoat. The letter was signed, Danny Sullivan's brother, Michael. Sarah told me everything before Morrison got to her. Before Morrison got to her. What did that mean? I turned the page and found my answer. A newspaper clipping dated this morning. Woman found dead in East River. Police investigating. Sarah Chen was dead. The only person who could prove I didn't kill Costello had been silenced. I heard footsteps on the stairs above me. Heavy boots, multiple people, trying to be quiet but failing. The cops had found me. But here's what they didn't know. That letter had given me something more valuable than an alibi. It had given me a name, Detective Ray Morrison. The man who'd orchestrated this whole thing was wearing a badge. The footsteps were getting closer. I stuffed the letter and photos into my jacket and looked for another way out. The basement had a service tunnel that connected to the building next door. Fighters used it sometimes when they owed money to the wrong people. As I crawled through that tunnel, one thought kept running through my head. Danny Sullivan was 19 when Costello killed him. The same age I was when I first stepped into a boxing ring. Someone had finally made Costello pay for that kid's life. But they were trying to make me pay for the revenge. I wasn't going to let that happen. The service tunnel dumped me out in the alley behind a Chinese restaurant. I could hear the cops tearing apart the gym behind me, shouting orders and slamming locker doors. They'd find the empty lockers soon enough and realize I'd been there. But they wouldn't find what I was looking for. See, here's what Michael Sullivan's letter didn't tell me. If Detective Morrison was running this operation, he'd need evidence. Real evidence. Not just Sarah's word against a dead man. I remembered something from my championship days. After every big fight, there were always cameras. Not just the broadcast cameras, but security footage from every angle. Promoters like Costello were paranoid about fighters throwing fights or taking bribes. They recorded everything. If Danny Sullivan really died because someone spiked his water bottle, there would be footage of it somewhere. And if Sarah Chen had been gathering evidence for 3 years, she would have found that footage. The question was where she'd hidden it. I made my way back toward Gleason's, but not through the front door. The building next to the gym had a fire escape that led to the roof. From there, I could see into the gym's upper windows. What I saw made my blood run cold. Detective Morrison was down there with his cops, but he wasn't searching like the others. He was destroying evidence. I watched him pocket something from locker 247, then signal to another detective who started wiping down surfaces. They weren't trying to solve Costello's murder, they were trying to bury it deeper. My phone buzzed. Text message, "You have something I need. Meet me at Pier 47 in 1 hour. Come alone, or your sister pays the price." My sister. They had my sister. Lisa lived in Philadelphia, worked as a nurse at Children's Hospital. She hadn't spoken to me in 2 years, not since I'd borrowed money from her and spent it on whiskey instead of rent. But she was still family. The only family I had left. Another text came through. A photo of Lisa leaving her apartment building this morning, unaware she was being watched. The message was clear. I climbed down from the roof and started walking toward the waterfront. Pier 47 was in Red Hook, a 15-minute subway ride if the trains were running on time. 45 minutes if I walked fast. I chose to walk, gave me time to think. Morrison wasn't just covering up a murder, he was covering up his own involvement in Danny Sullivan's death. Sarah Chen must have had evidence that connected Morrison to Costello's fight-fixing operation. Maybe Morrison was on Costello's payroll. Maybe he'd helped arrange Eddie Torino's accident. Either way, Morrison had convinced Sarah to kill Costello, then killed Sarah to silence her. Now he was cleaning up the loose ends. The problem was, I still didn't know where Sarah had hidden the evidence, and without that evidence, I couldn't prove Morrison was dirty. But Morrison didn't know that. As far as he knew, I'd found whatever Sarah had left in that locker, which meant he still needed something from me. The waterfront was deserted except for a few homeless guys warming themselves around a trash can fire. Pier 47 stuck out into the harbor like a broken finger. Morrison was waiting at the end, silhouetted against the city lights. He wasn't alone. 2 other men stood in the shadows, trying to look casual. They weren't cops, too well-dressed, too comfortable with the violence that was about to happen. "You're late," Morrison said when I got close enough to hear him. "Traffic was murder," I said. He didn't laugh. Morrison was a big man, maybe 6'4", with the kind of build that said he'd been a fighter himself once upon a time. His hands were scarred, and he carried himself like someone who'd taken more punches than he'd given. "You know why you're here," he said. "Because you killed Costello and you're trying to pin it on me." I didn't kill anybody. That was Sarah Chen's idea. Girl had a real talent for violence when she put her mind to it. "Before you murdered her too." Morrison's face didn't change. "Sarah Chen committed suicide, threw herself off the Manhattan Bridge. Very sad. Young woman like that driven to despair by what she'd done. Except she didn't do it alone, did she? You were there. You helped her plan it. Prove it." And there was the challenge. Morrison knew I didn't have proof. He was fishing to find out how much I really knew, but I'd been bluffing in poker games since I was 15. Time to raise the stakes. Hidden camera, I said. Sarah installed one in Costello's office 6 months ago. Got everything on tape, your meetings, the money-changing hands, the whole conspiracy. Morrison's expression shifted slightly. Just a flicker, but enough to tell me I'd hit something. Where's the camera? Safe place, along with copies of everything, insurance policy, you might say. One of the men in the shadows stepped forward. Morrison held up a hand to stop him. Here's what's going to happen, Morrison said. You're going to give me that footage, all of it. Then you're going to disappear. Leave town, change your name, start over somewhere else. And if I don't? Your sister's building has a gas leak. Very dangerous. Could explode at any time. The threat hit me like a left hook to the kidneys. These weren't empty words. Morrison had already killed 2 people. He wouldn't hesitate to kill a third, but I still had one card to play. Hidden camera's not just in Costello's office, I said. It's right here. I pulled out my phone, showed him the recording app that had been running since I walked onto the pier. Everything you just said is being uploaded to the cloud as we speak. Kill me, and this conversation goes public in 12 hours. Morrison's face went white. For the first time tonight I had him worried. But worried men do desperate things. Morrison lunged for my phone, but 3 years of professional boxing training doesn't just disappear. I slipped his grab and countered with a right cross that caught him on the jaw. He stumbled backward, more surprised than hurt. The 2 men in the shadows moved fast, too fast for civilians. These were professionals. The first one came at me with a knife. I grabbed a piece of rusted rebar from the pier and swung it like a club. The metal rang like a bell when it connected with his wrist. The knife went spinning into the harbor, but the second man was already behind me. I felt the barrel of a gun press against my spine. Enough, Morrison said, wiping blood from his mouth. Kill him. Make it look like he jumped. That's when the real hidden camera made its appearance. A spotlight blazed to life from across the water. Then another, then a voice amplified by a megaphone. NYPD, nobody move. Police boats surrounded the pier. Officers in tactical gear rappelled down from helicopters. Morrison's face went from confident to terrified in about 2 seconds. But here's the thing. I was as surprised as he was. Michael Sullivan, a voice called from the lead boat. This is Detective Captain Maria Santos. You can come out now. Michael Sullivan, Danny's brother, the one who'd written the letter. A figure emerged from behind the abandoned warehouse at the base of the pier. Young guy, maybe 25, with Danny's eyes and Danny's stubborn jaw. He was carrying what looked like a military-grade camera with a telephoto lens. I've been recording everything for the past hour, Michael called out. Got Morrison's confession, his threats, everything. Morrison spun toward him, rage replacing fear. You little bastard, your brother was a nobody. A punk kid who couldn't follow simple instructions. My brother was 19 years old, Michael shot back. He had his whole life ahead of him. Your brother was weak. He took the money, then grew a conscience. Costello had to make an example of him. And there it was. Morrison's admission that he'd been part of Danny's murder from the beginning. The tactical officers were moving onto the pier now, weapons drawn. Morrison's 2 thugs dropped their weapons and raised their hands. But Morrison wasn't giving up. He pulled his service weapon and grabbed me around the throat, using me as a human shield. I'm a decorated police detective, he shouted. 20 years on the force, you think anyone's going to believe some washed-up boxer and a dead kid's crazy brother? Captain Santos stepped onto the pier, her own weapon drawn but lowered. Actually, Detective Morrison, we've got quite a bit more than their word, she gestured to Michael Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan here has been working with internal affairs for 6 months. Every meeting, every payoff, every dirty deal you made with Costello. We've got recordings, photographs, bank records. Morrison's grip on my throat tightened. I could feel his desperation, his panic. Desperate men make mistakes. Sarah Chen was supposed to be our inside source, Santos continued. But when you killed her, we had to improvise. Lucky for us, you decided to frame someone who'd already caught our attention. You were investigating me? I managed to gasp. Investigating Morrison, Santos corrected. You were just collateral damage, until tonight when you became the perfect bait. Morrison pressed the gun barrel against my temple. I want safe passage out of here. Boat to international waters, or the boxer dies. No deal, Santos said, but I'll make you another offer. The old boxing bell from Gleason's gym started ringing somewhere in the distance. Must have been part of the police operation, a signal of some kind. But to me it sounded like the bell ending a round. Time for the final exchange. I remembered something my old trainer used to tell me. When you're trapped in the corner, don't try to escape. Attack. I drove my elbow back into Morrison's ribs as hard as I could. The gun went off next to my ear, but the shot went wild. I spun around and caught Morrison with an uppercut that lifted him off his feet. He hit the pier unconscious before the tactical officers could even react. The bell kept ringing as they handcuffed Morrison and read him his rights. It sounded like victory. Michael Sullivan walked over to me as the EMTs checked my hearing. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this," he said, "but I couldn't let my brother's killers walk free." "Your brother would be proud," I told him. He handed me something wrapped in cloth. "These belonged to Danny. He wore them in his last fight." I unwrapped the package. Inside were a pair of boxing gloves. Not expensive ones like my championship gloves, but honest working gloves. Gloves that had never been used to hurt anyone except in a fair fight. "Keep them," Michael said. "Maybe it's time you started fighting again. The right way this time." The bell finally stopped ringing. The harbor was quiet except for the sound of police boats heading back to shore. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe again. 6 months later, I was back in a boxing gym. Not Gleason's, too many ghosts there. This was a small place in Queens called Sullivan's Boxing Academy. Michael had opened it with the insurance money from Danny's death and some help from a few wealthy donors who'd read about the case in the papers. The new gloves felt different on my hands. Lighter somehow. Clean. These weren't championship gloves made of expensive leather with gold stitching. They were simple training gloves, the kind Danny Sullivan would have worn. The kind that honest fighters used to learn their craft without any dreams of corruption or easy money. I was training again, but not for a comeback. Those days were behind me. At 34, with 3 years of alcohol damage and a reputation that would never fully recover, I wasn't going to be stepping into any championship rings. But I could teach, and that's what I was doing. "Keep your guard up, Tommy," I called to the kid working the heavy bag. "Boxing's not about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." Tommy was 15, same age I was when I first walked into a gym. Same hunger in his eyes, same desperate need to prove himself, but hopefully he'd make better choices than I did. The trial had been a media circus, Detective Morrison pleading not guilty to 3 counts of murder, conspiracy, and corruption. Sarah Chen's family flying in from California to watch justice finally being served. Michael Sullivan testifying about his brother's death, his voice never wavering despite the tears in his eyes. The prosecution had enough evidence to convict Morrison 10 times over. The recordings, the bank records, witness testimony. Even some of Costello's other victims came forward once they knew it was safe. Morrison got life without parole. The judge called it one of the most heinous betrayals of public trust he'd ever seen. I couldn't argue with that. The boxing world tried to move on like nothing had happened. New promoters stepped in to fill Costello's role, new fighters got their shots at the title. But things were different now. There were new regulations, new oversight committees. The ghost of Danny Sullivan made sure of that. I never got my boxing license back. Turns out, even when you're proven innocent of murder, admitting to fixed fights in federal court tends to make athletic commissions nervous. But that was fine by me. I'd found something better than fighting. "Coach," Tommy called from across the gym, "show us that combination again, the one that won you the championship." I walked over to the ring where 6 kids were waiting for their lesson, all of them from the neighborhood, all of them looking for something to believe in. "That combination didn't win me the championship," I told them. "You want to know what really won that fight?" They nodded eagerly. Doing the right thing when it would have been easier to do the wrong thing. See, I was supposed to lose that fight. Someone offered me money to take a fall, but when the moment came, I chose to fight for real instead of fighting for money. "But didn't that mess up your career?" asked Maria, the only girl in the group. Tough kid with fast hands and no patience for self-pity. "Yeah, it did. Cost me everything for a while. But here's what I learned. You can lose everything you own and still keep everything you are, as long as you don't compromise who you are for money or fame or anything else." I pulled on the training gloves, Danny's gloves, and stepped into the ring. "Now, let me show you that combination, and then I'll teach you something more important, how to throw it with honor." We worked for another hour. Basic footwork, proper breathing, how to throw a jab without telegraphing it. The fundamentals that every great fighter learns before they ever dream of championship belts or pay-per-view cards. After the kids went home, I stayed to clean up the gym. Michael usually handled that, but he was at the courthouse today. Another hearing in a civil case against Costello's estate. The victims' families were finally getting some compensation for their losses. My phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this the boxer who brought down Morrison?" I'd gotten a lot of calls like this over the past 6 months. Reporters, true crime podcasters, people wanting to know what it felt like to survive a frame job. I usually hung up, but something about this voice was different. "Who's asking?" "Name's Rodriguez. Tommy Rodriguez. You knocked me out about 4 years ago. Tommy the Hammer Rodriguez. The fighter I'd beaten for the championship. The fight that started this whole mess. What can I do for you, Tommy?" I wanted to say thank you. Thank you. I was supposed to win that fight. Costello had it all arranged. I was going to be the new champion, make millions in endorsement deals. When you knocked me out, I thought you'd ruin my life. I waited for him to continue. "But you saved it. See, I found out later what Costello was really doing. The drugs, the fixed fights, the murders. If I'd won that championship, I would have been part of his machine, would have ended up just another victim when he was done with me." "Where are you now?" I asked. "Running a youth center in Detroit, teaching kids to stay off the streets, using the money I made from those last few fights before I retired. Clean money, earned the right way." "That's good to hear, Tommy. Listen, I know you can't get licensed anymore, but if you ever want to come to Detroit, I could use an assistant coach, someone who knows what it's like to choose principle over profit." I looked around the gym, at the photos on the wall of Danny Sullivan and other young fighters who died too soon, at the banner Michael had hung that read, "Fight clean, win clean." "Thanks for the offer, Tommy, but I think I'm right where I need to be." After I hung up, I walked over to the trophy case. Michael had put Danny's last championship belt there, the one he'd won 2 fights before Costello killed him. Next to it was a framed photo of Sarah Chen, taken before grief and anger turned her into someone else. And next to that was my old championship belt, the one I'd bought back from the pawn shop with money from the settlement the city paid me for Morrison's frame job. 3 pieces of metal and leather that represented 3 different kinds of victory. Danny's belt for fighting clean until the end. Sarah's photo for seeking justice even when it cost her everything. My belt for choosing honor over money when it mattered most. I locked up the gym and walked out into the Queen's evening. Tomorrow I'd be back, teaching kids how to fight the right way. Teaching them that sometimes the most important victories happen outside the ring. The new gloves were hanging in my locker, waiting for tomorrow's lesson. Clean gloves for clean fights. It was enough.